بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحابه أجمعين اللهم إني نويت التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم يا الله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ومولانا محمد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. So alhamdulillah, we've reached lesson 8 of this beautiful short, we refer to it as a work, a book, but it's really counsels that the great Imām Hujjatul Islam wrote, in fact as a letter to one of his students. And last week we spoke about the Imām and how he cautions us against taking whatever we may do in terms of our actions for granted. So one of the things that he mentions is spending the long nights awake, either in revising the knowledge that we've learnt, or in worship, but that in itself shouldn't allow us to think that those actions are enough. And the Imam continues here on page 1415. It's the last paragraph in both the Arabic and English. And the Imam says, أيها الولد أي شيء حاصل لك من تحصيل علم الكلام والخلاف والطب والدواوين والأشعار والنجوم والعروض والنحو والتصريف غير تضييع العمر بخلاف ذي الجلال. And so the Imam says, of course we've mentioned this before, walad meaning child, and we've mentioned why the Imam refers to his student as a child. Of course here it's translated as disciple. What result have you had from studying? Now in Arabic the way it's constructed is أي شيء حاصل لك. And the commentators tend to say that it's actually the way it's been constructed is negating, that you haven't achieved anything, not how much you've achieved. I mean, it can convey the same idea, but the meaning here is what do you think you've achieved, or you haven't really achieved much from studying the science of kalam, variously translated as either scholastic theology, philosophical theology, or any form of speculative inquiry into things that have to do with our belief. That's referred to in our tradition as kalam. Wal khilaf. Khilaf really, it's in the book it says rhetoric, but really it's juristic differences. Khilaf really is when the fuqaha of the different madhahib, so the Shafi'is and the Hanafis and the Malikis and the Hanbalis, they debate one another over why their positions are sound or stronger than other positions, and that engagement with other madhahib is referred to as khilaf in our tradition. Wat-tib, i.e. medicine, wad-dawaween, wal-ash'ar, which can be collections of poems, that's a diwan, but dawaween were also registers of names in the early part of our history, where names of people who engaged in the fatuhat, in the expansion of the lands of Islam, and who partook in them, and they will be recorded in registers, and they were referred to as diwans. Wan-nujum, which is astronomy, wal-arud, which is essentially the science of poetic meter, nahwi, he says grammar, which is fine, and tasrif, which is not really inflection, it's more to do with morphology, the structure of words. My brother Misbah would remember the times spent trying to figure out the various forms of different words. I say it because we used to travel to do that together many, many years ago. He says, what have you gained from all of this other than wasting your life in opposition to the Lord of Majesty? There are two readings here, so just point out. One of them says, for those who are interested in the Arabic as well, it says, بِخِلَافِ ذِي الْجَلَالِ. But another reading says, بِجَلَالِ ذِي الْجِلَالِ. And the reading that's preferred here is بِخِلَافِ ذِي الْجِلَالِ. In other words, are you setting yourself up by studying all these things in opposition to Allah? Now, what do you think the Imam means here when he says in this book, and he says something maybe even a little bit stronger in the Ihya Ulumuddin, where the Imam refers to the ulama of fiqh, i.e. sacred law, as the ulama of dunya. He says these are the ulama of dunya. But now in this text, the Imam's saying, well, all of these sciences, kalam and medicine and astronomy and grammar, and if any student that's studying in a madrasa, especially in the time of Imam al-Ghazālī, you would have studied, okay, maybe not every single one of these, you may have not studied astronomy or tib in a madrasa, medicine, but you would have studied these other disciplines. In fact, you probably would have studied astronomy. And so why is the Imam saying that these are, what have you gained? Because it almost stands to reason that the fact that you're studying them, you're gaining. But he's saying, what have you gained from all of these sciences? And keep in mind again, that he's going to make an argument that if this applies to these disciplines, then it applies even more so to other disciplines, right? And so, if you look at, for instance, we can take a clear example here of fiqh. If you look at the many branches of fiqh, fiqh is not just one area. You have ibadat, which is worship. You have mu'amalat, which is when we buy and sell and trade. You have ahwal shakhsiyah, which primarily deals with marriage, divorce, and things like that. You have governance, right, etc. Now, all of these branches of fiqh, you can say that the one that most evidently deals with actions that relate to the akhirah is ibadah, because you're engaged in salah, you're engaged in zakah, hajj. So of all the different branches of fiqh, the one that most evidently, outwardly, you can say relates to the akhirah is worship. Because when you're buying and selling, you may not always be aware of the fact that there's a sacred aspect to this interaction. Or when you're engaging in hudud, punishment, for example, or governance, it may not occur to you, or distantly occur to you, or dependent on the individual, of course. And so the Imam says that if you look at the activity of a faqih, i.e. the scholar of sacred law, it doesn't extend beyond the outward. It doesn't go beyond the outward form of something. And he says that if that's the case in relation to these disciplines, fiqh and all of these disciplines that he mentions here, then this is what we would refer to as an a fortiori argument. In other words, it's even more the case that it refers to things which are not religious disciplines, such as carpentry or engineering or accounts or whatever it might be. And so if we look at the shahada, for example, what does a faqih do here? This is a core aspect of someone coming into Islam, becoming a Muslim. The faqih, the scholar of sacred law, passes judgment on the basis of the proclamation of someone's tongue. They hear that you said, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna sayyidana Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu. They've heard that. And based on that, when one verbalizes the shahada, according to the faqih, that person is now a Muslim. That's what the faqih will say. Okay, you outwardly proclaimed your Islam, you are now a Muslim. That person's property, their lives, they've become sanctified. They're out of bounds now. But whether someone's heart actually believes is entirely outside the remit of the faqih. He can't tell you that. So what the faqih has done really is pass judgment on the outward form of someone's, hopefully, inner reality. But the faqih doesn't know the inner reality. If you take the prayer, for example, the salah, someone could perform the outward prayer and the outward form might be perfect, right? And the faqih will determine that the prayer is valid in sacred law, right? But how much of that prayer contains the akhirah, right? For instance, a person could, from the time they say Allahu Akbar until the moment of the final salam, the person could be thinking about their business. They're completely absent from the prayer. But what the faqih has done, that the faqih has seen, the person's engaged in the qiyam, the standing, the takbir, they said it in the correct way, they read what they had to read, the bowing, the prostration were all done in the manner that's expected. Outwardly, I can tell you that this is fine. This prayer is accepted, is valid, I beg your pardon, in sacred law. But is the prayer a prayer? Is the salah a salah inwardly, in the true meaning of the salah? And what the Imam is saying here is that the faqih can't tell you that. Can only tell you if the outward validity of your prayer is there or not. If someone says about khushu, now let's pretend for a second that the faqih starts speaking about khushu in the prayer. The moment that the faqih starts speaking about khushu, he's no longer operating as a faqih. He's now operating as a murabbi. He's stepped into a different realm of knowledge now. The realm of fiqh stops and he goes into a different realm. So it's not that, of course, the ideal scenario is that a faqih is someone of great spiritual states. But the Imam is warning us here is that there can be a separation. And you may not recognize or see that there's been a separation and such that you fall into that it's just the outward, because that's the Imam's complaint very strongly in the Ihya Ulumuddin, because he refers to the ulama as what? The ulama al-rasm, the mutarassimun, outward, people who are just engaged in interest in the form of ibadah. What's the reality of your ibadah? That's what the Ihya Ulumuddin is all about. And so, the Imam in fact goes as far as saying that when it comes to scrupulousness, ay wara', there is only one form of wara', of being scrupulous, that the faqih can say something about. Because scrupulousness is an inward state. But the only thing that he can say, there's many types of wara'. There's only one type that the faqih has some remit in, and that is whether or not someone is an upright witness in the court of law. And how do you establish someone's wara'? It's really interesting. Not by opening up their heart and having a look, but by looking at outward actions. Have they, for instance, committed a forbidden act in public? If they're engaging in acts of haram in public, and it's such that people know about it, then it potentially invalidates their standing as a witness in the court of law. Right? So that's the only, and again, it's just the outward that the faqih is determining here. Of course, there are other types of wara'. We know the wara' of the salihin, the wara' of the muttaqeen, and the wara' of the siddiqeen. They're all different, but again, the faqih can't speak about those things. So when the Imam says ulama ad-dunya, he's not referring, or he doesn't mean that they are scholars who are running after the world, because that's what we think. These are scholars of the dunya. Doesn't mean that they're running after the world. What he means is that the activity of a faqih relates to worldly outward things, because he can't look into your heart. And the worry that he has is that someone may get stuck in that aspect, and they may not see the vertical aspect of your knowledge. In other words, a faqih must be disposed to his soul. He must be conscious of the fact that knowledge can't really be classified as knowledge in a sense that the Imam is speaking about, and our deen requires us to think about, where it combines the ruh, the spirit, as well as knowledge that you acquire in books of outward forms. Now, so it's not about, in other words, me, look at me, the faqih. It's more about understanding what's the intent behind Allah's sacred law. And for example, what does Allah say about the salah? Inna salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar. That the prayer prevents you from abominable actions. Does it say inna salata, that the prayer تتكون من تكبيرات والركعات. No. Because what's the purpose of the prayer? Is the purpose of the prayer the raka'at, i.e. the prostrations and the sujood and, right? Same thing about the siyam. The siyam, the purpose of the siyam, is it to go hungry? No, it's not to go hungry. In other words, the actions that we're doing are there to bring us into another state of being, which is being conscious in front of Allah, which is being mindful of our, God forbid, sin output. Right? And that's what the Imam is trying to tell us here, that we need to see our acts of worship as things which are leading us somewhere. As the great ulama say, if our prayers every day are not increasing in our... Because we always say this, don't we? We say that, Islam wants, it commends us to do things in a perfect manner. We should do things which are proper and correct. Well, that's primarily, as a starting point, applies to our prayer. If we're not thinking about how do I make my prayer better, how do I spend more time on making the one that I'm about to perform better than the one I did, are we really making it perfect? As I said, it can't be the 5 minutes, that I'm about to go, let me pray now. Because we're not giving the prayer its time. Everything is based, the imad of this deen is on the prayer. Everything else follows on from that. In fact, all of the acts of worship follow on from the prayer. If your prayer is done properly, all of your other acts will follow on from that. Now, and so that's what the Imam says here. And then he says, إِنِّي رَأَيْتُ فِي إِنْجِيلِ عِيسَى عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامِ عَلَيْهِ الصَّلَاةُ وَالسَّلَامُ. He said that I've seen in the Gospel of Isa alayhi salam, من ساعة أن يوضع الميت على الجنازة, and that's correct, it's على الجنازة, not جنازة, إلى أن يوضع على شفير القبر, it's a qabr of course, يسأل الله بعظمته منه 40 سؤالا. That from the moment that the dead person is put on the bier till he is put at the graveside, Allah in His Majesty will ask him 40 questions. Right? Allah in His Majesty will ask him 40 questions. أولها يقول عبدي طهرت منظر الخلق سنين وما طهرت منظري ساعة. That worshipper, i.e. my abd, this is the first question. For years you purified yourself in view of people, and not for 1 hour did you purify yourself in view of me. Now, how does this relate to what the Imam has just said? Because if we're engaging in learning fiqh, kalam, nahu, sarf, and all we're doing is that we're saying, okay, this will become this course, this will become this paper, this will become... It's all to do with how you're going to dispense with this knowledge, without recognizing that there's a purpose for dispensing it. There's an underlying reason why we're doing this in the first place. So in other words, we spend so much time thinking about how to benefit people without thinking about how this is really benefiting us, or how it should be benefiting us. And that's what the scholars who comment on this book say, that someone who spent years purifying themselves in front of people, i.e., you, oh scholar, in other words, if it applies to a scholar, it applies to anyone else. If you spend all that time not thinking about why you're sitting here, for example, today, right? Why you're doing all of this, and you bring the back screen and you bring the Rode mics, right? The great whatever this is called, the camera phones, and nice cloth here, so that people who are watching it at home can feel a sense of aesthetic, right? But then, okay, how about the preparation for this then? If I just turned up, said, yeah, we'll just wing it today, or we'll just say what people are going to be happy with, so they come back next week. Imam Ghazālī says that if no one turns up next week, you should still sit and do your class. And there are scholars who do that. We've heard it from the greats, that when students would be absent from their classes, for let's say whatever reason they had, the teachers would continue teaching. And this was observed once by a student who forgot that it was a week off. And he went to see the Shaykh, and the Shaykh was still there, and he was teaching, and he looked and there's no one there. And so when he came into the presence of the Shaykh just said to him, just sit there quietly. And he continued teaching as if there were people there. Right? That's what the Imam's purpose is. That look, your knowledge is, you have to almost pretend that no one's here. You have to understand that you're putting out there barakat, hopefully. And those barakat will be absorbed by everything that has an atom in it. And those atoms will then permeate the people who come into contact, whether they're there now or later. It doesn't make any difference. That's your function. Hence, if there's 100 people or 0, it makes no difference. Who knows that this is a school, that the people who sit in this class, Allahu A'lam, from your intentions for coming and sitting in these seats, is something permeating through those very seats that you're sitting in, and is softening the hearts of those who are not within the da'irah of Islam. And those who are making them even further embedded in their understanding of what the deen is. You don't know, do you? Allah brings about change in ways that we don't know. In fact, many times in the Quran itself, in the Quran, Allah tells us that Allah will bring about things from places that you have no knowledge of. And we know that the cosmos is structured in that way. That the niyyah of the believer, the ulama, they tell us that when you speak about the greats, blessings will descend. Now blessings are kind of like an intangible thing. We talk about barakah, we don't really know what it means. We say, it's lots of barakah. Right? I'll give you an example of barakah, that way you can actually see it. Whenever you've been to someone's house and you've had food, right? You go to someone's house, there's like 5 of you sitting there, there's a huge feast that's been made, and everyone's eaten to their full, and you take the trays back, and your family tells you, no one's eaten anything. And everyone's stuffed. And you're trying to figure it out, but I'm sure everyone's really eaten. And you're trying to think, but how can I convince someone that they have when only a little bit's been taken? That's barakah. Because you've eaten a little bit, but what Allah has placed in terms of the satiating effect of the food has been multiplied. So what ordinarily would have been just enough for one person, Allah has made it enough for 5. That's barakah. And so you now have to look at that in every single thing that you do. That our job is not to think about people attending courses, classes, in the sense of having to worry about it. Just relax. Do what you have to do, and Allah will bring about whatever khair that there might be in what you're doing. Huwa rafi', we know that. Allah huwa alladhi yarfa'. He is the one who raises, He's the one who spreads. As we mentioned, was it last week or the week before? When the great Imām Ibn Ajrum finished writing his Ajrumiyah, what did he say? He took it to the ocean and threw it in. He said, Ya Allah, if there's any benefit in this, if I did it for your sake, bring it back. Right? Now someone might say, oh, this is just made up. I don't believe it is made up. I believe that that's probably the most simplest way of, and the ulama, in fact, probably did many greater things than that. And Allah returned their works to them or made their works. I mean, we gave the example of Murabit al-Hajj, Shaykh Hassan will tell us. I mean, the man lived in the deserts. He went to the place in the world where there's almost, you can say it's lifeless. But didn't life follow him there? Because of who he was, right? And this is the nature of the great people who are attached directly to Allah. The outward world becomes almost null and void, insofar as we're not interested in what people think of us or what they expect from us. We know what Allah wants from us, what Allah expects from us, and we do without any idea of La nuridu minkum jaza'an wala shukura. We don't want you to thank us or say any jaza. In fact, the Imam Ghazālī in the Ihya in Kitab al-Ilm, what does he say? He said that the muallim shouldn't expect any recompense from the students, even a thanks. Now, of course, on the side of the student, there's adab. That shows a comportment to knowledge, not to the teacher primarily. So it's upon us as students to respect our teachers, so far as we are students. But insofar as someone's a teacher, it's irrelevant to you whether someone comes at the end and says, great class. In fact, it should be the most troubling thing that someone says to you at the end. Shaykh Hassan, what do you think? What a great class. It wasn't meant to be a great class. It was meant to be something that's to be shared and go home and think about it for all of us, primarily the teacher. And so what's the first question, as the Imam was saying? عبدي طهرت منظر الخلق سنين وما طهرت منظري ساعة. That you spend all this time purifying yourself, making yourself look the part for everyone else apart from me. You've not even spent an hour doing that for me. And what they say, وَكُلَّ يَوْمٍ يَنْظُرُ فِي قَلْبِكَ يَقُولُ مَا تَصْنَعْ لِغَيْرِ وَأَنْتَ مَحْفُوفٌ بِخَيْرِ. That every day Allah looks into your heart and He says, what is this you are doing for others than myself, when it is my goodness with which you are surrounded. There's not even the minutest thing that we do, right, except that Allah has blessed us in the ability to be able to do it. Even, paradoxically, the things that are or sometimes not that great, it's still because of the blessing that Allah has given you. Say you spoke, God forbid, about someone in a way that's not becoming. You're only able to do that because Allah gave you a tongue. Allah gave you the ability to think about what you're going to say. Right? And you've used the blessing of Allah to actualize it in a way that's not becoming, right? And so that's what the Imam is saying here, that look, Allah says that, look, Anta mahfufun bi khayri, that you are surrounded by my blessings. Right? So how can the believer almost they say, dare to sin or transgress? Faults of a believer should be slips. That's what they say. Because someone might say, well, hold on, what about the fact that we sin? Does that not go against what you're just saying? No, it doesn't. Why? Because there's types of sin. There's a sin that you want to do it. You don't care about the consequences. Your heart desires it. Doesn't matter if people get hurt. That's one type of sin. But there's another type of sin that you just fall into error. You fall because you're just a weakness overcame you. And you couldn't help it. And that's the thing about the believer, that even when they're in that sin, their heart doesn't really want to be there. They're kind of saying to themselves, yeah, look, I know it's not really, I shouldn't be doing this. All sins are not created equal. Different types of sin. So we have to distinguish between. That's why, yes, it's true that the believer sins, but let the believer's sins not be of a type that he's enjoying, la samahallah, those sins. Right? Because Allah says in Surah Al-Hujurat, وَكَرَّهَ إِلَيْكُمُ الْكُفْرَ وَالْفَسُوقَ وَالْعِصْيَانِ, that He has made transgressing against Him hateful in the hearts of the believers. That's a sign of a believer right there. That if you feel that, even that's the beauty of it, even in the sins that you're committing, the good sign that you need to look for is that, do I feel bad? Do I really want to? Let's say you do the same thing again and again, day in, day out, but every time you do it, you think, look, tomorrow I'm not going to do it. This is the last time, and you go back. But it was sincere. Wallahi, I'm telling you, one day you'll stop. There's no doubt about that. As long as it was sincere from your heart, from the first moment, Allah will bring it about that you stop. And those people, and when I heard this for the first time, I was amazed at the terminology. They said that person is mubtala. Someone who's engaging in a particular sin and they're struggling to get themselves out of it, the scholars, they don't refer to as he's sinning. They say he's mubtala, that he's being tested by that. I just found that a wondrous and merciful way to look at our reality. That the people who then fall into those sorts of errors are not really, in a sense, sinners in the way that someone's consequentially going about committing sins. They're just being tested, and they just need to work out how to come out this test. Naam. Amma anta fa asam la tasma' is where the Imam concludes. But as for you, you are deaf and heedless. In other words, you're not paying any heed or attention to what the blessings that Allah has given. What does Ibn Ata'illah say? He says, من علامة الاعتماد على العمل نقصان الرجاء عند وجود الزلل. That a sign that you are depending on your actions is that you lose hope when you sin. Right? Because again, think about which sins you fall into, that we fall into. Is it the consequential types that we're, purposefully going about into the world committing, right? Or these slips? Right? Because if we know that we're just slipping, and we really are trying our best, we know that, look, inshallah, look, I'm not trying to transgress the bounds that Allah has placed. And so if I slip, inshallah, Allah's I'm in the kanaf still. I'm still there, inshallah. I believe that He's covering me. He's got me. He's going to facilitate my way out of this. But someone who's consequentially, purposefully sinning, and hence just saying, okay, then it must be that my relationship with Allah is purely based on my actions. I'm not really doing enough. And so when this person then slips, because they were relying on their actions, they begin to lose hope. But the reason why they lose hope is because they don't understand it's not actions that are getting you there in the first place. But what's preventing them from thinking in the other way is the blindness that's being caused by their purposeful sinning. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ نَسْأَلُ اللَّهَ السَّلَامَ وَالْعَافِيَةَ. And so the Imam says, أَيُّهَا الْوَلَدِ الْعِلْمُ بِلَا عَمَلْ جُنُونَ. الْعِلْمُ بِلَا عَمَلْ جُنُونَ. وَالْعَمَلْ بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ لَا يَكُونَ. That, O child, knowledge without action is madness, and action without knowledge is void. I remember when I read this for the first time, it was one of the most profound statements that I had read in this book. And I think I just tried to, and I don't know if I've even understood it today, 25 years on, but just trying to understand the profundity of what the Imam is saying here, that whatever we do without knowledge, it will always be deficient. Anything we do without knowledge will always be deficient. If we look at the salah, right? Can we perform the salah without knowledge? What are the arkan? What are the integrals of the prayer? What are the sunan of the prayer? What are the ab'ad of the prayer? When might you have to perform the sajda sahu? Right? If we enter the prayer without knowing those things, it's amal bila ilm. It is incumbent upon every Muslim to learn those things. It's not a choice. In terms of your furud al-aini, right? The things which are individually incumbent upon us, we have to sit down and say, okay, look, if I make these mistakes in my prayer, God forbid, what do I do? And if we're not doing that, and the same applies to Hajj, to the Zakat, things which are obligatory upon us. Of course, the Imams do make it clear. Is it fard on us to learn Hajj right now? No. Because we're not going on Hajj tomorrow. Well, those of us who are not. But those who are, best be getting into those courses right now, because we need to know how to perform Hajj. Right? So there's things which become incumbent upon us the moment that they are obligatory. So the prayer, you have to do it every day, 5 times. Saum, you have to know when the time. So a refresher at the beginning of Ramadan is exactly what we should be doing, both in terms of the fiqh of Saum, right? I mean, in the Shafi'i madhab, you have to have the niyyah every evening, right? Now, if someone's, let's say, of that madhab and they don't have, the niyyah of the night before, then what? Now, of course, there's rukhas and there's ways out if a faqih grants you that dispensation, but the point is you have to know. Right? Or the Hajj, like I say, you do it once you learn the fiqh of the Hajj, once you need to perform the Hajj. Now, but if it, and here when the Imam says, وَالْعَمَلُ بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ لَا يَكُونَ, that he's saying that there isn't even a category of things that we can say that we can refer to them as actions. بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. Why is he saying that? Because if you're doing physical actions without knowledge, you're not actually doing anything. You're just moving your body. That's what he's saying. وَالْعَمَلْ بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ لَا يَكُونَ. There is no such thing. It's just movements, exercise. It's profound if you think about it. And so if one of the things that's really interesting here is that if it weren't for engaging in acts, whether it's acts of worship or actions more generally, what use would it be to bear the burden and difficulty of acquiring knowledge? Right? The commentators say that no one that's possessed of a sound mind would place himself in difficulty if nothing resulted from it. So you've gone all these years away to Tarim, to Damascus, to Egypt, to the Yemen, and living in difficult conditions sometimes, and for years on end, and it's it can be hard sometimes, right? So after all of that difficulty, or whether you've gone to universities, I don't know if it's hard or not, but it has its own difficulties. The Imam's point is that, as the commentators tell us, if there's no result of that hardship, you're mad. Why are you doing this then? Why did you put yourself under all of that difficulty and strain and hardship if there was nothing was going to come from it? No. وَاعْلَمْ أو وَلْيُعْلَمْ وَلْيُعْلَمْ يعني because we have Mashaykh here today, Shaykh Hassan's here, so أَدَبًا مَعْهُ. And again, I should apologize to Shaykh Hassan, he's really should be, and I say this without mujamala, I'm not given to exaggerate or to say, he really is someone who we should be benefiting from. So I took his permission, by the way, before I started today. And so in the text it says wa'lam, which in Arabic is a fi'l amr, it means know, but they say when you're sitting with people of knowledge and teachers especially, and Shaykh Hassan is one of our teachers, you say wal yu'lam, let it be known. Why? Because it's not good manners to say to someone who's your teacher, wa'lam, I know, because they're the one who are teaching you. So you say in a third person imperative, wal yu'lam, let it be known. So wal yu'lam أن العلم الذي لا يبعدك اليوم عن المعاصي ولا يحملك على الطاعة لن يبعدك غدا عن نار جهنم. نعم ونسأل السلام والعافية. That it should be known that knowledge which does not remove you from sins today and does not convert you to obedience will not remove you tomorrow from hellfire. In other words, if whatever you're doing, whether it's religious knowledge, whether it's non-religious knowledge, if it's taking you further and further away from the purpose that we are here for, if that's the case today, how on earth do you expect it to help you on the Day of Judgment? نعم. وإذا لم تعمل بعلمك اليوم ولم تدارك الأيام الماضية تقول غدا يوم القيامة فرجعنا نعمل صالحا. That if you do not act according to your knowledge today, in other words, you've learned all of this. So we mentioned a few weeks ago, someone has engaged in a study of deen, and anything else, you've trained 5 years to be a car mechanic, and at the end of it you say, no, I don't want to repair anyone's cars. This makes no sense. Let me train 7-8 years, whatever it is, to become a medic, and I'm not going to practice medicine, or whatever it may be. It doesn't follow from that. So the Imam is saying, look, if you're not going to act on your knowledge today, and you're not going to make amends for the days gone by, in other words, even in those days that you were acquiring knowledge, there were certainly moments that you fell short. You need to fix those moments. Either squaring things between you and other people, or asking Allah to forgive you for the shortcomings of where you've fallen short in terms of Allah's rights. And if that's not the case, the Imam says, you will say tomorrow on Yawm al-Qiyamah, and this is an ayah from the Quran, فَرْجِعْنَا نَعْمَلْ صَالِحًا. Send us back and we will act virtuously. And it will be replied, they say, one of the angels will reply, Ya ahmaq, anta min hunaka taji. Fool, that's where you've just come from. What are you saying, that you want to go back and do it all over again? Because some people say, how can you earn Jannah over 60 years, 70, and likewise, how can someone be condemned to Jahannam on account of 60, 70, 80 years? It's such a short period of time compared to this eternity of bliss, wal-'iyadhu billah, torment. But what did the ulama tell us? It's not the 60, 70 years. That 60, 70 years is just a snapshot of who you really are. And the hadith are very clear about this, that someone who is يعمل بعمل أهل الجنة حتى لا يكون بينه وبينها إلا ذراع, that you'll have someone who outwardly, that someone who's engaging in the acts of the people of Jannah, until there doesn't remain between that person and Jannah one span, that's it. Right? But then what happens? They start engaging in acts of the people of a hellfire and they enter it. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. And the opposite, someone who's acting like someone of the hellfire until there doesn't remain between them and the hellfire one span, and then they change themselves. and they start acting in a virtuous way and they enter paradise. And someone may look at that and think, this is scary, because are we saying that all of this that we're doing, that there are, that this can happen? And what does Imam Taftazani say in his commentary on this hadith? He says, this is ala ma yabdu minhu. This is that, in other words, the person who you were seeing performing these great acts of worship wasn't doing it for the right reasons. There was always something in them that wasn't quite who they are. In other words, this snapshot of their life of 60 to 70 years, the totality of what you see that weighs down in the balance is what will have weighed down after 1 million years, 2 million years. If in fact, if anything, the further on it went, the heavier the scale would have been in the other side. So it's a mercy that you're not allowed to continue, let's say, our transgressions for more than this limited period. Because the thing is, when human nature is that when we transgress and we're not taken into account, you just get worse. There's no one checking you. You think, yeah, I can keep doing this. So even if we live for 1 million years, rather than saying how can someone be condemned to an eternity of torment based on 70 years, it's really saying that tabarakallah, that you weren't allowed to spread your evil for more than 70 years. Because were you allowed to have done that, then we've seen Syria on the news now. I mean, it's unfathomable what people, that a human being can do this to another human being in a span of a few years. Subject them to the most heinous forms of torment and punishment. It's anwa' at-ta'dhib that are just la yutasawwar, can't even be conceived by the human mind. And so you think, wow, I mean, can there be that many people that engaged in just saying, yes sir, I'll do that? They're referred to as Pavlovian dogs. Dogs that are trained to do whatever you want them to do. They have no idea that, if I say no, that it's the right thing to do. I don't want to do this to another human being. Because look, it takes a lot of people to be complicit in that type of thing. It's not just 10 people, is it? And so we're seeing it that, look, this is what the idea of good and bad action ultimately amounts to. Our lives are just symbols. They're symbols of who we are. We just need to really work hard on saying that, inshallah, Ya Rab, I really hope by your karam and your lutf and your rahmah that you have written for us sa'adah. That's who we are. We're people of sa'adah. Because if we are, it's only because of you. That's what you wrote for us. And we, want to be part of that circle, right? And it's really something that we should, that the snapshot of our lives at the end, that's what it is. Husnul khatimah. What's it? Al-a'mal bi khawatimiha, right? That's where we know who someone is when the stamp is done. When you left the world, that's who you were. That's it. Whether you lived for 10 years or 10 million years, the same thing. Now, so inshallah we'll stop here today.